AMD Developer Inside Track is here with Frank Swehosky from the CodeAnalyst Team. Frank, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Frank Swehosky. I joined AMD right out of college in the year 2000. So I've been here 10 years, been working on the CodeAnalyst project the entire time, along with a couple of other projects they tossed my way.
Great, so you're very well qualified to tell us about CodeAnalyst, and what I wanted to cover today was we recently added Visual Studio 2010 support. Can you walk us through the integration process of how CodeAnalyst integrates into Visual Studio?
Sure. Visual Studio makes it pretty easy for various people to make add-ons or integration packages. They have a whole SDK that we use. There are classes that we have to subclass and implement various methods, and then it just plugs right in. It's great. A little tricky debugging it sometimes. You have to have another browser or another IDE nested within it to debug it, but it works pretty nicely.
Great, so from a user perspective, they kind of turn it on and...
Right, from a user perspective, they've installed Visual Studio 2010. They've maybe done a couple of projects. They installed CodeAnalyst, and it asked them upfront, do you want to integrate with Visual Studio during the installation? It's checked by default, so all they have to do is hit OK. Then the next time they open Visual Studio, there will be an ability to open a CodeAnalyst project for each Visual Studio project they have. There's a pane on the toolbar that comes up saying tool window that the solution explorer's in, that they can say, hey, create a new CodeAnalyst project for this, or they can use the convenient toolbar and just click that button to get the CodeAnalyst going. Once a CodeAnalyst project is created for Visual Studio project, it will automatically pull the current startup project settings. So when you click debug Visual Studio, it runs an application. If you're working on a DLL, it'll launch the executable that'll use that DLL, and CodeAnalyst will pull that information out of the project and use it. So you don't have to find your executable again, don't have to worry about command arguments or the working directory.
That sounds very convenient. And what if they already have CodeAnalyst installed and then they want to install Visual Studio 2010? Is there a different process they have to go through to get it to recognize?
You'll need to reinstall CodeAnalyst.
You will,
but
okay.
Fortunately for you, we're doing quarterly updates, so there should be a new version of CodeAnalyst out with better features.
There you go, so you should be upgrading your CodeAnalyst every quarter anyways.
Why not?
Good to know, okay. What type of code can you profile with CodeAnalyst?
You can profile any code that will generate PDB information. With Visual Studio, primary users are C++, C, and of course .NET applications. You can use any of those for CodeAnalyst. For the unmanaged code, it's easy. You've got the native code, you've got the symbols, just works like any other compiler would. With the managed code, you have the just-in-time stuff. And CodeAnalyst, we've written a profile agent that will be activated during when your code's compiled on the fly, and will capture the information, the native code that's generated, so we can give you the source line information for the just-in-time stuff that isn't generated until you actually take the profile.
Interesting. So then how do you optimize that?
Right. You're given the assembly level information if you want it, or you can go down the source line. It's a little trickier with just-in-time stuff or managed stuff because you're not sure how the virtual machine is going to render it. But if you're trying multiple things, you can do the same function 3 different ways and see how the virtual machine renders it.
Gotcha.
See if it's more efficient one way or the other. And of course, the data the way you structure your data can matter a lot. So if you have loops, nested loops, accessing data, the way the classic example, which is shipped with CodeAnalyst, does, you can see how data cache misses will occur. If the Visual Studio 2010 managed code implements that, it'll do it the same way. And you will still be able to see, hey, there's a lot of data cache misses at this source line. Whether or not it's been implemented one way or the other in assembly with the managed code, you'll still see the misses. So you can say, I need to rework this algorithm to make sure that the data is accessed more efficiently.
Are there any advantages to using CodeAnalyst within the IDE itself, within Visual Studio? Well, I guess you sort of covered that with not having to find the file.
Right. The main one is convenience.
Yeah.
You're right there in the IDE. You don't have to swap back and forth between different applications. You don't have to build it, then go to another application to run it, and then go back and worry about previous versions and such.
Is there anything that's limited by using it within the IDE?
Not that I can think of.
Okay, great. Now, and the other question we get asked often in Developer Central is, does CodeAnalyst only work on AMD processors?
No, not at all.
Okay.
On Windows, we've specifically coded it so any platform with an APIC enabled will work. And all modern systems have APICs. We worried about the APICs about when the Athlon K7s were out, but nowadays they're in everything. And that will let timer-based sampling occur, which is every so many milliseconds you take a sample. That'll work on any system. The vendor-specific events or the instruction-based sampling, which we're very proud of, is unfortunately limited to AMD chips right now because that's the only ones they're implemented on.
Right. We have the IP for those, so we can enable them, right? Finally, I just wanted to ask the last question, which is, what is the CodeAnalyst team working on now? What's coming up?
Sure. The June release, we moved to a quarterly release schedule, and the June release is going through QA right now. We have fixed a couple of minor things and then implemented NGen for Visual Studio 2010. The .NET version changes a little each time, and therefore some of the tools like NGen or the output change, so we have to adapt and move on. NGen allows you to pre-JIT the managed code for a particular machine. It will generate the native code once, so you don't have to run the virtual machine on it every time.
Okay, so it would be pretty important to download each new iteration of CodeAnalyst if you're...
Well, we recommend it, but if it's not convenient for y'all, then, don't worry about it. If there's a particular bug that you find that's bugging you, please let us know. We've got the support email, we've got the forums, and we will try and get your specific bug fixed in the next version.
Great. Well, thanks so much for your time, Frank. It's been very enlightening.
Glad to help. Thank you.
Thanks.